Okay, in this video, let's talk about the issue essay. On the left, you have the organization of the issue essay. Keep in mind, this is not the only way to organize it. ETS claims quite confidently that there are many different ways to organize these essays. However, you will see on the left the way I organize them. So let's talk about that. In my organization, you have the introduction. Inside the introduction, you have the hook. So the hook can be a lot of things. You have a lot of flexibility with the hook. It can be a generalization, it can be an anecdote. An anecdote is kind of a short story that, has a point to it. It can be an interesting fact, it can be a trend, it can be a quote. But really the main idea of the hook is that it introduces the topic, nothing more. Don't say your thesis or supporting ideas. Don't do it, right? You're saving that for a different part of your essay. Then you're going to do what I call the shift to the prompt. So one thing good writers do is they're cohesive. What that means is all of the sentences are in some way connected. What I find is a lot of my students, whenever they give their thesis after their hook, is it seems very abrupt and very sudden. So without this shift to the prompt, the introduction seems not as cohesive as it should be. So makes your essay more cohesive. An abrupt shift to your thesis is awkward. Then you get into the most important part of the essay by far, the thesis. Remember, the thesis is your position. It is your driving force for everything that happens in your essay. So you have to be careful that you choose a thesis that can kind of dictate what the rest of the essay is doing. This baby is the boss that controls everything. And then finally, you have what I call the outline. And what you do in the outline is you tell your reader how you're going to structure your essay. So you're actually going to tell the reader that you have like 2 reasons or 3 reasons, or you say one thing about one thing about the agree stance, and 2 things about the disagree stance. And when we get into the example, you will see what I mean. But just keep in mind, you want to tell your reader what the structure of your essay is. Before we move on to the organization of the body paragraphs and the conclusion, I want to talk a little bit about choosing a thesis. So the way I approach these essays is when you're choosing a thesis, you actually have 4 choices. So the prompt is going to be a statement, and they're going to ask you if you agree or disagree with that statement in most cases. They don't always do that, but they do that in most cases. So the first choice you have would be all the way on the right here, and I call this the strongly agree thesis. If you come a little bit to the left though, right there, you have the mostly agree thesis. Come over here, you have the mostly disagree thesis. And then finally, on the very left, the extreme side, you have the strongly disagree. The reason this is important is whatever you choose, the organization of your essay changes. So for example, if you choose mostly agree, that has a different structure than strongly agree. I'll just kind of briefly outline that for you. So mostly agree, if you have 3 body paragraphs, so body 1, body 2, body 3, and then strongly agree, you have 3 body paragraphs, body 1, body 2, body 3. Well, obviously, in the strongly agree section, you're going to have 3 supporting points going down, right? But in the mostly agree, one of these points, like right here, is going to talk about the other side. It's going to say something about the other side. And then you're going to have 2 supporting points for the agree side. So if that's unclear to you right now, no problem. We're going to do an example of it. Now typically what I choose is I choose either mostly agree or mostly disagree, but you certainly don't have to. I have seen many examples from ETS where they choose the strongly agree. So I've seen many examples here. And I've also seen many examples where they chose strongly disagree as well. And you know, these essays have a score of 6. You know, even 5, so 5 or 6. So don't be afraid to choose any one of these 4 choices. As long as you do a good job of presenting your case, you can get a very high score. Okay, let's get into the organization of your body paragraphs. So the very first thing you're going to have is a topic sentence that introduces the supporting idea. It is imperative that this introduce the overall idea of the paragraph and that it supports your thesis. So when I read the supporting idea of your body paragraph, it better be telling me the main idea of that paragraph. It's kind of the mini thesis. It controls everything that happens inside that paragraph. Don't say some kind of small idea that is not a main idea of that body paragraph. Then after that, you're going to have the example. You need a good example here, preferably one from history, politics, economics, etc. If that's not possible, think of a good hypothetical. A hypothetical is a situation that is not real. Think about an if clause. You know, if this happens, this would happen. I don't want to hear about Uncle Bob, so don't give any kind of personal example here. You can occasionally get away with this, but as a general rule in a GRE essay, you don't want to be giving personal examples. And then finally, here's something a lot of people are lacking when they write. You actually need to develop this idea. You need to explain this idea. You need to explain how your supporting idea connects to your thesis. You need to explain why this matters. A lot of my students, especially when they first start writing these essays, they kind of stop the body paragraph after the example. Or they tell a really long example and never explain how it connects to the thesis or how it connects to the supporting idea, and the paragraph seems underdeveloped. Finally, the conclusion. You have 2 routes here. If you chose a strong thesis, like strongly agree or strongly disagree, the first thing you should do is introduce a counterpoint that someone from the other side might use to argue against your position. So in this sentence, you're actually saying something good about the other side. But then immediately you're going to shut it down. You're going to shut down that counterpoint and explain how it doesn't apply and it doesn't hold water. Finally, you're going to rephrase your thesis and wrap it up. You're just going to finish this essay. You're going to say, for the above reasons, you know, blah, 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 blah. Here's my thesis, blah, blah, blah. If you have a moderate thesis, and remember, a moderate thesis is like mostly agree or mostly disagree, explain how this issue is very complex and that there are no easy answers. And then finally, just like in the first route, rephrase the thesis and wrap this baby up. So now that we understand the structure of the issue essay, we actually need to choose a prompt. And I recommend choosing a prompt randomly because on the real test, you are of course given a prompt that you did not choose. It's just a kind of like, surprise, here's a prompt. So here's what I do. I go to the pool of issue topics. This is on ETS's website. So every possible issue prompt that you might see on the real test is included on this website. And you can just go to Google and type in pool of issue topics GRE and this website will come up. And what I do is I just scroll down without reading any of them and then I just choose one. Alright, here it is. So that's the prompt I have. Whether I like it or I hate it, I just have to deal with it. So let's go ahead and read it. College students should be encouraged to pursue subjects that interest them rather than the courses that seem most likely to lead to jobs. Write a response in which you discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the recommendation and explain your reasoning for the position you take. In developing and supporting your position, describe specific circumstances in which adopting the recommendation would or would not be advantageous, and explain how these examples shape your position. So now we're ready to write And I'm just going to follow the structure on the left here. Hook, shift, thesis, outline. So I'm going to get into my hook here, and remember the only job of the hook is to introduce my topic. That's it, nothing more. I don't want to say my thesis, and I don't want to say any supporting ideas. So I might say something like this. The choice of one's major, let's say college major, is not a trivial one. In fact, it is not uncommon for entering students to ruminate on this decision for months, perhaps years, and then once a decision has been made, immediately begin to second guess it. So then I'm going to do a quick review, make sure I didn't make any mistakes. So uncommon, well, that's not a word. Okay, so it looks pretty good. And then now I just want to shift into the prompt. And recall, the prompt takes a position. The prompt says, college students should be encouraged to pursue subjects that interest them rather than the courses that seem most likely to lead to jobs. So I might say something like, the prompt recommends that students not belabor this point too long and simply choose a path that conforms most closely to their interests and skills. Okay, something like that. And now I'm going to try to wrap up this introduction as quickly as possible and just get into my thesis. So for this prompt, I'm going to take a strong approach, a strong opinion. I'm going to say I strongly agree. So just keep it simple, keep it clear. In my opinion, I strongly agree with this suggestion and argue that students look inward rather than outward when choosing college courses. And then finally, don't forget to tell the reader the structure of your essay. I'm just going to say this for 3 reasons. And what that tells the reader is that I have 3 body paragraphs that support my position. So again, you don't have to be too detailed. If you come over here, it doesn't have to be overly detailed. You can list these reasons, you can write them out. The problem is these are going to be the topic sentences of your body paragraphs. So if you write them out, you're going to have to write them again, and you can't just repeat yourself. So you're going to have to rephrase them. It's obviously time consuming, you might make a mistake. So really, if I just want to wrap up this introduction as quickly as possible, I'm just going to say for 3 reasons. Okay, let's move on to the first body paragraph. So in this first paragraph, rather than mention the benefit of focusing on your interest, I'll do that in a later paragraph, I'm going to mention the downside of choosing a career based only on the availability of jobs or the courses that most likely lead to jobs. So I'll start like this. To begin, the job market is ever shifting, and one decade's hot job is another decade's dying one. Thus, to choose one's profession based solely on the availability of work is to take a short-term approach. I would say short-term perspective. That sounds a little bit better. One that will likely backfire. Now let's go ahead and analyze this a little bit. So I start with my topic sentence. It starts with a transition to begin. And this topic sentence tells the reader what this entire body paragraph is about. So this body paragraph is about that the job market is not stable, and then I put hot in quotes here to indicate that it's not going to be hot forever, that's a temporary phenomenon. And then I kind of did a little bit of a parallel structure when I said one decade's hot job is another decade's dying one. And then I kind of just clarified the point here, or I just kind of emphasized it. It's almost like I reworded this to make it a little bit more clear, or really just to hammer home the point. Now after I do this, I'm going to immediately move into my example. Notice I'm just following the structure. So I have my topic sentence. In this case I have 2 sentences, but they say roughly the same thing. And then I'm going to go into my example. And remember, you need a good example here. Something from history, politics. You don't want to be making an example that's too personal, because that doesn't seem like you're really analyzing this issue that well. So we could say something like this. For instance, in the 1950s through the 1980s, nuclear engineering was a rapidly growing field as many of the most powerful, sorry, I keep making mistakes, nations on Earth were not only designing and manufacturing nuclear weapons, but hundreds of nuclear power plants as well. Now, right now, this example is not finished, so I need to elaborate on it a little bit. Okay, so let's bring the screen down a little bit. Okay, so hundreds of nuclear power plants as well. Consequently, nuclear engineering graduates were able to find high-paying work almost immediately upon graduation. And then here comes the shift. Remember I said that the job market is always shifting, right? So, however, because of issues related to NIMBY, not, make sure I capitalize all these, backyard, and recent nuclear accidents like the well-publicized Fukushima disaster, many countries are moving away from nuclear power in favor of other green technologies. Now let's stop here, make sure I didn't make any spelling mistakes. Keep in mind that your word processor or your processor on the GRE computer is a piece of crap, and so there's no spell check or anything like that. There's no red underline. So the revision process, you have to be a little bit more careful. Now let's talk about this example. This example is specific. It talks about a specific industry, nuclear power. It talks about specific concepts like NIMBY. It talks about the nuclear accident at Fukushima. And all of this supports my main topic sentence of this body paragraph that, yeah, nuclear engineering looked really good in the 60s and 70s, but it doesn't look so good now. And so even if you disagree with that example, my logic is still sound. My example still supports my logic. So yeah, the GRE graders are not really going to be arguing with your example. Oh, that's wrong, that's not true. I'm a nuclear engineer, there's a lot of jobs. What they're really looking for more is just solid logic. Okay? So let's go ahead and finish up this body paragraph. Students who chose nuclear engineering in the 1970s because of the, and I'm going to put abundant in quotes here to show that they were abundant only for a short time, job prospects were certainly facing a different job market in the 1990s, and this market has only worsened through the 2000s. That's a pretty long example. I typically don't like my examples to be that long, but you know, it was pretty complex and you had to talk about the past and the present and even the future a little bit. So finally, I need to do the last part of my body paragraph, which is the development and the explanation. So you need to develop this idea. You need to explain how your supporting idea connects to your thesis. So I would probably start, you know, with something like this. The above example illustrates that the job market is highly contingent upon unpredictable factors, and that if one assumes it is static, he or she is likely to get burned at some point in the future. It seems absurd to think of now, during the current technological boom. And now here I'm going to introduce a rhetorical question to kind of really hammer home this point that even job markets or jobs that we think are guaranteed and you will definitely have employment, it's not necessarily the case in the future because nobody can predict what's going to happen and many factors are at play here. So I'm just going to introduce this rhetorical question just to really kind of get the reader thinking. But will the software engineering industry still possess dizzying job prospects in the future. History tells us that it will not. And I think that's a pretty fitting end to that body paragraph. Now, even if you don't kind of use the same vocabulary that I do, or the same grammar, or the same sentence structure, or the same example, notice the structure is exactly the same. So this highlighted part right here matches with this right here. And then I immediately go into my example. Now this example was pretty long, all the way from there to there, but it was a pretty complex one, so I guess that's not too crazy. And then finally, I finished the body paragraph with my development and my explanation right there. Okay? Now, don't be afraid to make changes to your essay as you do it. So one thing I've noticed is this body paragraph is pretty long, and I don't think I'm going to have time to do 3 reasons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and then put down 2 reasons. And I think I'm going to be okay because, like I said, this is a pretty lengthy body paragraph. I just have to make sure that my second body paragraph is also very well developed. So let's go ahead and look at the second body paragraph. Oops, sorry. So I'm going to start with a transition further. And again, I'm just going to follow this structure on the left, just like I did for the first body paragraph. So here comes the topic sentence. Even if we assume that the job market is not dynamic, that it is as unchanging as gravity, one should still pursue his or her interests because our happiness level plays a crucial role in how effectively we work. So notice this entire body paragraph is going to be about why it's important to follow our passions because we'll be happy. And why is it important to be happy? It's important to be happy because it makes us work more effectively. So I'm immediately going to go into my example here, and I'm going to say, for instance, if a student who is passionate about horse training pragmatically chooses the path of computer programming because of the plethora of lucrative job opportunities, she runs the risk of finding herself in a field she abhors, and of course abhors means hates, right? Strongly hates, and a job she finds no satisfaction in. Now let's talk about this example. This example is what is known as a hypothetical. So a hypothetical is an unreal situation, and for me, for this body paragraph, I couldn't really think of a example from history or economics or anything like that. So what I did here is I just presented a solid hypothetical. I just presented a scenario that's specific in nature that supports my topic sentence, right? So this girl, this woman, she's very passionate about horse training, but she, quote, pragmatically chose computer programming because there were so many job opportunities, and then she ended up that she didn't like it. And in fact, this is what I did. When I was going into my university, I chose chemical engineering because I remember looking at like a top 10 salary list, and I saw like chemical engineering was number 2 or something. Very stupid reason to choose a major, by the way. So don't be afraid to draw on personal experience when you write these essays, but don't really mention I or me or anything like that. It's better to present it as a hypothetical because it can be applied to anybody rather than just applied to yourself. So let's keep this example going a little bit longer because remember I only have 2 body paragraphs and I want to make sure it's balanced with the first body. So she might go to work each day, sit at her desk and stare at her computer screen with the horse wallpaper, wondering what could have been and the career path she could have chosen. She might complete her programming tasks haphazardly and submit subpar work. So again, I think we're pretty good on the example length. It's already getting a little bit too long, but this body paragraph is not finished. Just like before, I need to develop it. So let's get into some of this development. So research has consistently shown, let's say demonstrated, keep it a little more academic, demonstrated that perhaps above all other factors, happiness has the most direct causal effect on work efficiency. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't think anyone would dispute it. I mean, I'm sure happiness plays a pretty large role in work efficiency. Maybe not the highest, but I don't think anyone's going to be opening up Google Scholar or you know, the library at their university to find out if there's actual research on this. Okay. So let's kind of rephrase this. In other words, workers who find personal satisfaction in their craft not only work faster, but produce higher quality products and services as well. Thus, on a macro scale, governments should encourage their populations, let's come down, should encourage their populations to pursue their passions, because long term, doing so leads to a more smoothly functioning economy, not bogged down by worker discontentment. So again, I'm just developing here. I'm just kind of explaining, you know, maybe giving some advice to governments or to people or to students or, you know, something like that, because the efficiency is important. Now, I have to be careful here because the prompt does talk about college students, but it doesn't necessarily say that it benefits only them. Notice this use of passive voice right here. They should be encouraged. So perhaps their parents are encouraging them, or governments, or something like that. So again, I think my development is okay. I think it's okay to mention governments here because of the way the prompt is phrased. And then finally, let's go ahead and wrap up this body paragraph with a little bit more development. One needs to only look at government regimes from the past that forced many of their citizens to work on farms for the collective good. I'm using a lot of quotations in this essay. Hopefully that's not a problem. The vast majority of these workers had no interest in being on the farm, and agricultural output plummeted as a result. So what I did here is I kind of introduced another little small example inside the development to help the development even more, right? And then finally, this phenomenon can infect an entire economy if people choose fields of study based solely on the promise of work and income. Something like that. Again, I'm not saying it's perfect. Ooh, that should say vast. I'm not saying it's perfect, but you're doing the best you can in this kind of limited time frame. So come back up to my outline. My outline said 2 reasons, so I'm almost done here. So I'm going to do the conclusion now. Now remember, in the conclusion, that should say introduce. In the conclusion, you kind of have 2 options here, the strong thesis and the moderate thesis. I took the strong thesis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a counterpoint. So you say something like this. All right. Of course, some argue that in our increasingly globalized economy, competition for jobs has skyrocketed and thus it is imperative that we pursue practical paths. But let's attack this, right? So someone might give this advice, but, you know, how would you rebut? How would you go against this if you were taking a strong position? You know, I might say something like this. However, isn't that precisely why we should follow our interest? If we do so, we're likely to do the best job possible. We're likely to compete at the highest level. We're likely to carve out a niche for ourselves in this increasingly globalized world. So right here I'm kind of, you know, quoting the counterpoint and kind of using these words against them, saying, okay, if competition is so important in this world, then I better choose something that I actually like so I can do a good job at it and then be near the top of the competition, right? So I'm kind of attacking this point with some rhetorical questions and kind of flipping it on the counterpoint. Okay, and then finally, let's just finish this essay. People who ignore their inner voices do so at their own peril. And essentially what I did there was I just rephrased the thesis. Now I rephrased it in kind of a unique, maybe not just a word for word rephrasing, but really that says the same thing. People who ignore their inner voices. So if you ignore, they focus on the outside. And I say do so at their own peril, and that is obviously a negative thing. So basically what this means is you should focus on your inner voice and your passion and your interest. Okay, so that is that's the issue essay. Let's make this font a little bit bigger. All right. And quickly I'm just going to read through it just so we can see that I am following the structure. So in the introduction, I should have a hook, a shift, a thesis, and an outline. All right, so let's make the hook red. Let's make the shift to the prompt. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's make the shift to the prompt this blue color. Well, they can't really see the blue. Let's make it this. Man, a lot of these are kind of hard to see. Let's make it that blue color right there. Let's make the thesis bold because it's the most important. And then let's make the outline, let's make it green. Okay? So the choice of one's college major is not a trivial one. In fact, it is not uncommon. So the hook is all right there. So again, we're making that red. Okay? The prompt recommends that students not belabor this point too long and simply choose a path that conforms most closely. So that right there is our blue color. That is our shift to the prompt. Oh, I like that color. It's a little bit easier to see. Okay, and then finally, the most important part of the essay. And are looking where we're choosing college courses. So right there, all of that is my thesis. Let's make it bold. Let's make it a little bit bigger because it's just so important. And then finally, don't neglect this. This tells the reader what you're doing. So let's go ahead and make that green. This tells the reader that you have two body paragraphs. All right, in our body paragraphs, we have our topic sentence. So let's go ahead and make that. Let's reuse some of these same colors. Let's reuse the red. Let's make the example that kind of nice blue color. In the development and explanation, let's make that green. All right, so the topic sentence in this case is actually 2. So there's my topic sentence. Okay. Now the example here is pretty long, but it's a pretty complex one, pretty good one. So right all the way there, and we're going to make that blue color. And then finally, the rest of this is just my analysis and my development. We're going to make that the green color. Okay? So you'll notice that I'm following the exact advice I give you when I write these things. And your examples and your topic sentences and your analysis and your development, they don't have to be as in-depth as mine are. You know, I've been doing this for a long time, but I want you to really follow the structure. The structure doesn't change. Maybe the sentence structure changes and maybe the ideas are a little bit more fleshed out in one rather than the other, but adhere to the structure because it tells you exactly what to start writing when you hit the issue essay on the GRE. Okay, I'm not going to do the structure of the second body because it's the same thing, but let's look at the conclusion. So I have a strong thesis. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce this counterpoint, and then I'm going to shut that down and explain why it doesn't apply. Let's make that blue, and then finally I'm going to wrap it up. Let's make that green. Alright, so here is where we introduce this counterpoint. Here is where we shut it down. And then here is where we rephrase the thesis. Right there. That's it, guys. That is the issue essay. Okay. If you have any questions, let me know. All right. I hope this was helpful. Bye.